Hi everyone, Sharon here with Mac Senior and another episode of On the Road. Today I'm taking you to the John Muir house in Martinez, California, and that's less than 10 miles from where I live. And I love John Muir. I love Muir Woods. I love Yosemite. But I really didn't know that much about him until I decided to take you to his house. And I thought, well, I should know maybe a little more about him. And so I watched a documentary, and oh my gosh, did you know that he was raised by, well, first of all, he came to this country when he was 11 years old from Scotland. His father brought the family over because he felt the ways of the Scottish people were just too wicked. And he came over here to be able to practice his stern type of religion, and he would beat his children if they didn't know their scriptures. And by the time John Muir was 11 years old, he could recite the whole of the New Testament and 3/4 of the Old Testament. I don't care how much someone might beat me, I would never be able to memorize the whole Bible. So I think he was really an extraordinary man, and I hope you enjoy the visit to his home. So here we are outside the visitor center at the John Muir House in Martinez, and this is right off of Highway 4 on Alhambra Avenue. And as you can see, his house was built up on a hill. Actually, this was not his house; it was his father-in-law's house, and his wife inherited it when her father died, and but it was primarily the house where John Muir did all his writings. And, I really like all the different images of him, but I'll show you my favorite image of him. I believe this photograph was taken after he got out of college and was working as an industrial inventor. But of course, this is the way that we all know him, as a person who talked about the Sierra Nevadas as the range of light. Thought that that's what they should be called. And there's a lot of wonderful timelines that you can see when he was born and where he was along his journey. Um, he had an industrial accident that blinded him when he was very young, just out of college, I believe, on his first job. And that when he got his sight back after a few months, it really changed his life. And he set out on a walk from Cincinnati, Ohio to the bottom of Florida. And he was going to go to the Amazon, find the headwaters, and then travel down it to the ocean. But he got malaria in Florida, and that changed his plans. So look at this old piece of equipment. I'm not exactly sure what this is, but I just love the old photographs and the fact that he was a fruit rancher. That was his father-in-law's business, but he came and took over the business for the father-in-law and turned it into a very profitable, successful business. Now look at this tree. What in the world happened to this tree as a young sapling palm to make it grow like that? Whatever happened to it to cause it to fall over like that, I think it shows that it grew up with a good attitude. So this is looking across the expanse of the property and up towards the house. And that peach orchard that you saw in the last sweep at the bottom of the hill, you can go and eat those peaches. They don't allow you to bag them up and take them away, but you can come onto the property and you can pick those peaches and eat them. And I'm going to do that next time those peaches are in season, because I love peaches. And I really like this house too. It's a beautiful example of, I think, a wealthy person's home around the turn of the century. Well, the turn of our last century, at any rate. And they have kept it as true as uh, his offspring who helped restore it could remember it in their life. And he actually rebuilt that fireplace himself. All of the 5 fireplaces in the house collapsed when the 1906 earthquake came along, and they all had to be rebuilt. And that was how he rebuilt that one in the grand parlor. This is like another living room or a music room, and the young man that conducted the tour talked about the cost of that red wallpaper. It was made in France, and it was very, very expensive to have colored wallpaper like that. So they were a wealthy family, or his father-in-law was certainly a wealthy man. And John Muir hated this room. This was his father-in-law's office, and it just really bothered John Muir to have to think about all those redwood trees that were cut down to make that paneling. And here's an interesting story that the ranger told that you might think is interesting also.
So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. If you have the opportunity, great in the spring. If you're there on a full moon, when that full moon rises, you'll actually see rainbows coming through the mist of Lower Yosemite Falls. So he was seeing this and decided he wanted to see what the moon looked like through the full spray of the waterfall. So he climbs up to Fern Ledge, which is about halfway or a third of the way up the upper section there, and decides to try and climb out and scramble out and get behind the water. He gets to a point where the ledge is probably no wider than this gap.
Oh my God.
About 3 or 4 inches, just
boy.
big enough for his heels to stay on. And so he can just kind of shimmies across, gets some angular kind of little flakes of granite, and comes to a gap, takes a big step, gets across that gap. I mean, it's certain death if you fall at this point. And eventually does make it out behind the water on these tiny, tiny ledges.
Wow.
But of course, wind shifts, and when you're talking about 800 feet of water, a little bit of change in wind is going to really change the direction of that water. So the water starts pounding him on his back, on his shoulders. He hunkers down, holds on, barely, and rides it out for a couple minutes. Wind shifts again, and he's able to get back down.
Whoa.
Just kind of reverses everything. Then just goes back to camp, lights a fire. Specifically, he mentions in his journal lighting a fire to dry his socks. I think he would have wanted to light a fire to warm himself up, but he mentioned drying the socks, and then he wrote a letter to a friend.
Unbelievable.
So crazy adventures like that. I mean, that's what Muir kind of meant to me to start off with. And
Now we're in the kitchen, and this stove apparently was a wood burning stove and also a coal burning stove. And the fireplaces in the house, some of them were coal burning and some of them were wood burning. So they had two different sources of heat. And that little photograph there was their cook. I thought that was interesting. And so he's just talking about all the different ways that they lived back at that time in the kitchen. And there's their sink. And then this is a room where they kept, I guess, grains and breads. But I like looking at this old stuff. There, I guess that was an ice box. Yeah, there's a closer up picture of their cook. And just some more memorabilia in the pantry closet, I guess that was. So now I'm headed upstairs, and I just had to pause and take a shot of this beautiful, I don't know what they called this piece of furniture that was usually right inside the front door where you put your hats and your umbrellas and stuff like that. But I love the detail of the woodworking in this house also. It's just beautiful. So this is the second level where the bedrooms were. Very high ceilings. And look at that bed. Isn't that gorgeous? More of that red wallpaper that was so expensive. Now that's interesting. That looks like a closet right there. And most of these old houses, they had wardrobes instead of closets. I love these little built-in sinks too. They had running water in their bedrooms, but no toilets in the house. Still had outhouses back then. Isn't that woodwork beautiful though? And look at this hat box on the bed that the top hat sits in. I thought that was interesting. I think this was his bedroom. And then across the hall is what he called his scribble room, where he did almost all of his writing. And this is interesting how they had his papers laid out on the floor. I really like this room. You know, it's interesting that when he came to live in this house and raise his family and run the fruit business for his father-in-law, he stopped. Really stopped writing, and his wife really encouraged him to go walking again. And so he walked from Martinez to Yosemite. And the interesting thing is, when he walked, he didn't take anything with him but a backpack that had the New Testament in it, a book of poetry, the book Paradise Lost, his journal, and a book on botany. That amazes me. He did not carry food with him. He didn't have uh, any warm bedding. He would just make a fire and curl around it. And I don't know what he did for food. I'll have to read another documentary to find out that answer, I guess. And this is the stairway to the attic. And I love attics in old houses. And I was delighted that they allowed us to go up into the attic. But here's the view from the third floor looking down through the second to the first floor. And then this is the attic. And oh my gosh, they had so many pieces of antique furniture up here. It was amazing. Boy, someone who has a passion for antiques would just love being in this attic and seeing all of those um, beautiful old pieces. They were really everywhere. Boy, there was just antiques everywhere up here in this attic. I wonder what they're going to do with all that stuff. And then this is the view out the front of the house from the attic. Can't you just see a carriage pulling up there? And then there was one more little staircase to the bell tower. And I was delighted to be able to go up there. And isn't this a cool little room? I'm sure the view, well, this view used to look out over all of their orchards. And of course the palm trees and even though it wasn't real easy to do holding my iPhone as my camera, but I got to ring the bell. Wasn't that cool? So we say goodbye to John Muir, but before we go, I want to leave you with this last image of him because it was one that I think changed the course of the United States. And that was a 3-day camping trip that President Theodore Roosevelt went on with John Muir. And John Muir had 3 whole days to convince the president how important it was to set aside beautiful land like this for the benefit of all the people so no one would ever be turned away. And Roosevelt followed through. The United States was the first country in the world to set aside land as national parks. That makes me proud. I hope you've enjoyed today's On the Road video, and I'll be back with more.